Tons of different news stories, from stimulus to the thing going on in the UK with this mutation. In the meantime, of course, we're all still on like the most intense lockdown we've had yet domestically. How does an investor figure out what's going to be the driving force going forward?
That's a great question, and I think that there's a lot of confusion out in the market right now regarding the news on the virus over the weekend, and also the impact of stimulus and how long that's going to carry, because obviously that only goes through the end of March on the unemployment benefits. And there's going to still be a lot of challenges, I think, on the economy. But one of the things that we've seen this year is that the stock market isn't the economy. There is a tremendous amount of momentum behind the stocks that have been doing well, and they appear to, if you look at today, how they've turned around, they continue to do well. Despite kind of the different challenges they're facing. So in 21, we're looking at probably a more challenging environment on the fixed income side. And if, as investors look at what kind of returns they got out of their bond portfolios, I think that's going to be very difficult to replicate. And then also we think there could be some transition in terms of the leadership.
In terms of leadership, we've seen a little bit of that happen, the rotation. How important is it to see how some of these reopening trades hold up over the coming week or 2 weeks, now that we know what stimulus is here in the short term, right? There's no longer any use for our imagination. Maybe we can start picturing what the future might be like after we figure out what goes on with Georgia and how easy new bills are going to be to pass next year. But we've got the stimulus right now that we know is coming. We know that the lockdown here in the U.S. is as widespread as it's ever been, but maybe the curve is starting to come back down. And we've got the vaccines rolling out. So, Andrew, should the next couple weeks give us a good sign of how much these new rotation names can become momentum? Are we going to see the airlines and the banks be that new place investors go in to buy any dip as opposed to the tech stuff? Is that actually going to last?
I think that's difficult to say. I'll talk about the banks first off. The news that came out over the weekend with regards to the banks being able to buy back stock and be able to manage their balance sheets more effectively, that has a significant impact. If you look at the amount of stock that those companies had bought back in 2018 and 2019, it was very significant. And then if you also compare that, or you add to that the fact that we think interest rates will be higher, which probably improves the earnings capabilities of the banks, we think that the financials are a good spot to be going forward. As it relates to airlines, this is a more complicated one, because I think that airlines, if you look at the profitability of airlines, everything's on the margin. You make your money off the last 10, 15, 20 people who get on that airplane. And I can tell you from our business, we see a big change in terms of the amount of travel, especially business travel, even after the vaccine, even after all of the different things that are in place to get the virus under control. The amount of travel that takes place could be fundamentally changed, and I think that causes us some hesitation when we look at the airlines, because I don't know exactly how that impacts them if those last 20 business class customers don't take those flights. On the margin, that changes the profitability picture. There could of course be big movements coming out of this, just out of a relief rally, but longer term I think we still have some questions on that.
Andrew, in terms of where there is a different type of risk. I mean, with the reopening trades right now, it seems the risk obviously is that reopening doesn't go well. On the other side of the market, the risk seems to be one that is very hard to gauge, and that's just when they run out of steam, where there's froth. You highlight a few areas in terms of some of the big movers like Tesla, IPOs, some of the special purpose acquisition companies. We're going to have somebody on later on the show who loves trading and investing in these things. What's the counterpoint you would offer for traders who have been watching all these SPACs go to the moon every time they launch?
Well, I think that the SPACs I mean, the SPACs have been around for a long time. It's just the amount and the volume and the significance of them, and also the size and quality of companies they're able to buy. It's very different. I can remember 15 years ago SPACs coming through, and it was very much a different type of promoter and a very much a different type of target that they were going after. So there's definitely more legitimacy around it. But I think it was 2 weeks ago maybe that you had 3 or 4 SPACs announced within 48 hours of each other, all going after EV, electronic vehicle, different markets. Some was in the charging, some was on the battery side. And that's a level of enthusiasm that probably tells you, I mean, they always say they don't ring bells at the top and they don't ring bells at the bottom. But I think that you're seeing some things taking place where the amount of enthusiasm around certain themes. Tesla clearly is an incredibly innovative and important company, but Tesla's valued more than every single car company in the world. I think that piece that Research Affiliates put out last Friday is really interesting, looking at what does Tesla have to achieve in order to grow into its valuation. And so all of us have been around, or a lot of us have been around for multiple iterations where things get overextended. It could be the housing crisis, it could have been the dot-com bubble, and there are definitely pockets of investor exuberance that I think probably get shaken out at some point. And there's companies like the IPOs that we saw. If you saw DoorDash and you saw Airbnb, great companies. There's a lot of work that has to be accomplished in order to grow into those valuations, though.
Andrew, how much of the EV, specifically that space where a lot of the SPAC stories have been connected? Obviously, Tesla is the paragon of this group, but there's tons of others that have even been more powerful lately, NIO being one of them. That's a little bit of a different story. In terms of the domestic EVs and that entire energy-style trade, are there deep expectations now for policy to follow through on that in a Biden administration? Do you think the Georgia runoff that decides how easily new legislation will pass if Democrats also have the tie vote in the Senate? How important is that now? Because if all these trades are riding on expectations of like some giant Green New Deal that we know the opposite party here of the president is going to be against, I mean, are all these trades now just like sitting at the whims of what happens in this Georgia runoff? Is that the biggest event now for markets in these frothy EV names?
That's a great way of framing it. I would frame it that I'm not sure that the people on the margin buying the EV stocks are thinking through the Green New Deal over the next 12 or 24 months. I think it's more about, if I buy it today, will I be able to sell it tomorrow for something higher? But going to your point and on the EV side, I think that the thing that investors have to remember, and I know that Ford and GM and Volkswagen, these other companies seem old and tired, but they're putting a lot of energy, a lot of money, and a lot of brain power behind the EV opportunity, just the same as these upstarts are. And so it's not a market that isn't going to be owned only by new companies. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for the old mainline automobile companies as well. And I think that that's something that people have to remember, is that the other side that you're competing against, they're not standing still. They're coming after it in a very hard, diligent manner. And I think that the political environment is such that you could also have the political environment all of a sudden change the rules on you, and things don't look as good as they might have. And I think that the Georgia runoff could be a part of that.